We're here in Warwick, Rhode Island, along the shores of the Providence River, also seen as Narragansett Bay. Just beyond this point of land, the Gaspee, a British revenue schooner, ran aground and was attacked by the citizens of Providence. The captain was shot, the ship was burned. It's one of the opening salvos in the American Revolution. Rhode Island was founded in 1636 by Roger Williams. Roger Williams was thrown out of the Massachusetts Bay Colony for new and dangerous opinions against the authority of the magistrates. He came down here, made an agreement with the Indians, and started the settlement at Providence. The colony of Rhode Island grew up around that. But we got a charter in 1663 from the king that allowed us a tremendous amount of freedom. We could elect our own governor. We elected our own General Assembly. About 100 years after we received our charter, the British Crown decided that the colonies needed to support the empire a little bit more. It was a tremendous drain on the British economy. So there were taxes, there were trade restrictions imposed. And Rhode Island had felt that since we were defending our own colony, we didn't really have to pay England for helping to defend ourselves. This caused a conflict. The British Crown imposed different restrictions called the Intolerable Acts, the Stamp Act, all of these other things. Trade restrictions, we could only trade with English colonies. And Rhode Island had a long history of doing what it wanted to do, trading with other colonies. Pirates and privateers were based out of Rhode Island. And so when these restrictions were placed on it, Rhode Islanders basically ignored them. In the beginning of 1772, the Crown sent a revenue schooner to Narragansett Bay to control trade coming in and out of the bay, to make sure that people that were trading out of the bay paid their customs and their taxes. This ship was called the Gaspee. It was His Majesty's armed schooner. It was based just off of Newport, where it could control access in and out of Narragansett Bay. Now, to understand this, Rhode Island is a small place. It's only 35 miles wide by 49 miles long, but we have 420 miles of coastline. This was our lifeline. Trade by sea was the lifeline of Rhode Island. And the revenue schooner, the HMS Gaspee, with Captain Duddingston in charge, was choking off the lifeline of Rhode Island business. He said at one point that he would treat every ship that he ran into as if it were a pirate, because surely that's what they are. This lasted for about 6 months. The people here were really getting angry with Captain Duddingston. The governor asked Lieutenant Duddingston to present his papers to the governor. Duddingston refused. He said he did not need to present his papers to a provincial authority. He had authority from the Admiralty. Well, British law at the time said a British warship could not operate within the territorial waters of any part of its dominion without local permission. Here, the Gaspee was operating in Narragansett Bay. There was some dispute over where open territorial waters began and where they ended. And in June of 1772, it all came to a head. The packet Hannah, which normally made a run from Newport to New York, was in Newport, no cargo, and it goes north up Narragansett Bay. The Gaspee sights it and gives chase. Zigzagging up the bay, off of Namquit Point at the time, the Gaspee takes a hard tack to the east, and the Gaspee runs hard aground on a large sandbar sitting there. The Hannah continues up to Providence. Captain of the Hannah, Captain Lindsay, goes and talks to John Brown. And Brown sends a drummer up and down the main street of town in Providence, announcing any able-bodied man that wants to go burn the Gaspee, meet down at Sabin's Tavern. About 80 people show up. They plan. They figure out what they're going to do, and they get into about 8 longboats and row from Providence down the Providence River to just back here. They're coming in single file. The captain comes out in his nightshirt and gets near the bowsprit and shouts out, "Who comes here?" And someone in one of the boats answers, "I'm the sheriff of Kent County with a warrant for your arrest." Just about that time, one of the guys in one of the longboats stands up, grabs a musket, and says, "I can shoot that fella from here." Takes aim and fires. The accounts all indicate that Captain Duddingston was struck 5 inches below the navel. He goes down. The people in the raiding boats glom on board the Gaspee. They capture it. The sailors are taken off, put into longboats, and brought ashore near here. The captain's wounds are treated. He's put into a longboat and taken ashore, and either accidentally or on purpose, the Gaspee catches fire, burns to the waterline, the fire hits the powder magazine and blows it to smithereens. There's not a trace of the Gaspee left out here. People have looked for a long, long time. But what happened? Well, the very next morning, people are walking around in Providence. One guy's got the captain's hat on, walking around. the governor had to put out an announcement saying there would be a 100-pound reward for anybody coming up with any information about what had happened with the Gaspee. Now remember, they had sent a drummer up and down the main street of town. They had all 80 people had met at Sabin's Tavern. As typical throughout Rhode Island history, nobody knew nothing. The king made a proclamation, 500-pound reward. Nobody was ever arrested. Nobody was ever brought up on charges. There was an inquiry, and it went through some very typical Rhode Island isms in that evidence was presented, evidence was denied, witnesses were sick and too ill to go to the inquiry. In the end, nobody was ever prosecuted for this. But what it did was it spurred the other colonies into action. This is where the committees of correspondence started in between all the colonies, so that they were all informed about what was happening with each other and with the British Crown. Now, these were not professional soldiers that did this. These were not well-trained men. These were sea captains. These were sailors. These were the people whose livelihoods were put at risk by the Gaspee sitting out there. They formed together to defend their rights and to stop the Crown from interfering with trade here in Rhode Island.